Everyone thinks the wrist is the natural home for a heart sensor. But your finger proves the opposite. One dense artery bed, zero bone in the way, so the pulse it reads is cleaner while you sleep. Here's why this matters at night. Sleep is when your body stops hiding. Your resting heart rate settles, your heart rate variability shows up, and your overnight recovery signals surface. But a wrist strap has to read all of that through bone, tendon, and a band that loosens and gaps for 8 hours. The ring sits where the plumbing is dense. And everything a wearable tells you the next morning depends on one thing: the quality of that overnight read. Start with the simplest thing the ring measures: your heartbeat. The trick is light. Tiny LEDs on the inside of the ring shine straight into your finger. A small light sensor right next to them measures how much of that light comes back. This is called photoplethysmography, reading your pulse with light. Say it once, then forget the word. Just picture light going in and light coming out. Here's the mechanism. Blood absorbs light. Every time your heart beats, it pushes a fresh slug of blood into the arteries in your finger. For a fraction of a second, there's more blood under the sensor, so more light gets absorbed and less bounces back. Then the pulse passes and the light returns. Beat dims, beat dim. Trace that flicker over time and you've drawn a waveform. The spacing between its peaks is your heart rate. So why the finger and not the wrist? Because the arteries in your fingertip run close to the surface with almost nothing in the way. No thick bone, barely any tendons. The light reaches the blood and comes back with a big, clean swing. At the wrist, that same light has to fight past the 2 forearm bones and a rope of tendons before it ever finds a decent artery. Same technology, worse real estate. The finger hands the sensor a pulse waveform that's simply larger and easier to read. But a heartbeat is only the first signal hiding in that light. The next one takes 2 colors. Now the second signal, how much oxygen is in your blood. Same finger, same light trick. But this time the ring uses 2 colors on purpose. Red light and infrared light, which is just light your eyes can't see. Here's why too. Blood that's carrying oxygen and blood that's already dropped it off are literally different colors underneath. Oxygen-rich blood is bright red and lets red light pass. Oxygen-poor blood is darker and drinks red light up. Infrared behaves the opposite way. So the ring shines both, measures how much of each comes back and compares them. That comparison, the ratio between the 2 signals, tells it what fraction of your blood is still carrying oxygen. That number is your blood oxygen, often written as SpO2. A healthy overnight reading usually sits around 95 to 100%. Watch it sag repeatedly and something is interrupting your breathing. Here's the part that should feel familiar. When you've been in a hospital or a doctor's office and they clipped a little glowing gadget onto your fingertip, that clip does exactly this. 2 wavelengths of light, 1 ratio, oxygen percentage. The fingertip has been the classic spot for measuring blood oxygen for decades, long before any ring existed. The ring didn't invent the sight. It just moved a proven fingertip measurement into something you wear all night without thinking about it. So light gives you pulse and oxygen. But there's a third signal it can't measure. And for that, the ring uses heat. Signal 3 is temperature. And this is where the ring's shape quietly wins. On the inside of the band, pressed flat against your skin, sits a tiny heat sensor called a thermistor. It's a bead whose electrical resistance changes as it warms and cools, so reading its resistance reads your skin temperature. But here's the important twist. The ring isn't trying to tell you an exact number like a fever thermometer. It's tracking the trend. Every night it measures how warm your finger runs, and it compares tonight against your own weeks of history. The single number barely matters. The direction does. Why does the finger make this work? Because it stays put. Your finger nestles against that sensor all night with steady skin-to-skin contact. So the ring gets a calm, continuous read for hours. A wristband can't promise that. It gaps, it slides, it traps and releases air, and the temperature it sees jumps around with it. Now, what does a trend actually reveal? Your baseline is you on a normal night. When your finger temperature drifts up a little for a few nights running, it can be the first hint of an illness coming on, often before you feel sick. For people who menstruate, a sustained rise flags a shift in the cycle, because body temperature genuinely steps up after ovulation. None of that shows up in one reading. It only appears when tonight is measured against 100 of your own nights. So the ring has pulse, oxygen, and temperature, which raises the real question. Why does the wrist lose at all 3? Here's where the wrist really falls behind. It's fighting anatomy. Between a wrist sensor and the arteries that carry a strong pulse sit the two bones of your forearm, the radius and the ulna, plus a bundle of tendons running to your hand. Light and pressure both have to get past all that hardware before they reach good blood. The finger has almost none of that in the way. Then there's movement. Think about a wristband while you sleep. It's a loop bigger than your wrist, so it slides up and down and rocks side to side every time you shift. Each time it moves against your skin, it smears the light signal. The sensor can't tell a real heartbeat from the band jostling. Engineers call that motion artifact, and it's the enemy of a clean read. A ring barely moves. It's a snug band on a narrow finger with nowhere to slide, so the signal stays still enough to trust. And the finger has one more gift most people never hear about. In your fingertips there are dense, direct shortcuts between the arteries and the veins. Extra plumbing packed into a tiny space. This makes the fingertip one of the most blood-rich spots on your entire body, which means one of the most signal-rich spots for any light sensor. More blood right under the light means a stronger, steadier waveform. So the wrist loses on 3 counts: bone and tendon in the path, a band that won't hold still, and thinner blood supply. The finger wins on all 3 at once. Put those advantages together, and a small ring starts to look less like a gadget and more like the right place to listen. Now watch it all click into one picture. A single ring on your finger reads your heartbeat, your blood oxygen, and your temperature through the whole night. And it can do that not because the chips inside are smarter than a watch, but because of where they're sitting. The finger is simply better optics. Light in, light out on a patch of skin packed with blood and clear of obstacles. Every advantage stacks in the same direction. The pulse waveform is bigger there because the arteries sit near the surface with 0 bone and 0 tendon blocking the light. The oxygen read is trustworthy there because the fingertip has been the proven place to measure it for decades. The temperature trend holds there because the finger stays pressed to the sensor all night. And the whole thing stays clean because a snug ring doesn't slide the way a loose band does. That's the master loop closing. The finger doesn't beat the wrist on cleverness. It beats it on location. One dense artery bed against a wrist full of bone. What you actually walk away with is a sharper overnight read. A steadier resting heart rate, cleaner heart rate variability, and recovery signals pulled from the best sensor site your body has to offer. Not because the device tried harder, because it stopped fighting your anatomy and sat where the blood already is. So the one idea to keep is this. For reading your body at night, location beats gadgetry. The dense artery bed in your finger wins because it skips bone and tendon and sits right on the blood. Which opens the next question. Once a ring has all night of clean pulse and temperature data, how does it actually decide you slept well? That's the software story, and it's the next box we'll open. Subscribe and we'll take it apart together.